Moses. And guess what? God also has a plan for us, each and every one of us, for everything about our lives. God has a plan for it. And the plan for each one of us is not going to be the same, but God has a plan and He is in control. It is hard for us to accept when things are going badly, when all the obstacles are right here, not way out there in the future where, oh, I can deal with that when I get there. But when they're right here, it's hard to believe that there is a plan, isn't it? Because all we can think about is our discomfort, our fright, our doubts, our not trusting, all the things that go along with that. All right, so keeping all this in mind, let's read through the text that we have this morning, and then we'll talk about it. We'll talk a little bit about the way God plans things, okay? All right, so we'll do it like we always do. I'll read the first verse. You guys read the next one. Read after me, and we'll just go through this. So it's the first 12 verses of Exodus chapter 4. It says, "And Moses answered and said, But behold, they will not believe me, nor hearken unto my voice. For they will say, The Lord hath not appeared unto thee.
And the Lord said unto him, What is that in thine hand? And he said, A rod.
And he said, Cast it on the ground. And he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses fled from before it.
And the Lord said unto Moses, Put forth thine hand, and take it by the tail. And he put forth his hand, and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand.
That they may believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath appeared unto thee.
And the Lord said furthermore unto him, Put down thine hand into thy bosom. And he put his hand into his bosom. And when he took it out, behold, his hand was restless as snow.
And he said, Put thine hand into thy bosom again. And he put his hand into his bosom again, and plucked it out of his bosom. And behold, it was turned again as his other flesh.
And it shall come to pass, if they will not believe me, neither hearken to the voice of the first sign, that they will believe the voice of the last sign.
And it shall come to pass, if they will not believe also these two signs, neither hearken unto thy voice, that thou shalt take of the water of the river, and pour it upon the dry land. And the water which thou takest out of the river shall become blood upon the dry land.
And Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heareth with two voice, nor sittest thou hast spoken unto my servant. But I am slow of speech, and of slow tongue.
And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb, or deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord?
Now therefore go, and I will give with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say.
Amen. All right. So as you read this, you see a couple of things about Moses right away that we'll talk about as we go through the verses. But Moses was real quick to offer up something every time God asked him to do something or directed him to do what? What did Moses offer? Excuses. Seemed like he was the king of excuses there for just a bit, doesn't it? All right, so kind of going back and recapping, I'm going to start with verse 1 there. I'm not going to read it again. We'll read some of them, but not that one. God has appeared to Moses and given him a task. We've already talked about this. Go back to Egypt, talk to Pharaoh, free the Hebrew people, and lead them out of Egypt. That's Moses' job. Now, God is instructing Moses to do this. Moses has not been in Egypt for 40 years. He's been a shepherd for 40 years. I'd say there's a lot of people don't even know who. Now, there's a remnant that knew who he was when he came back. But there's a lot of people that had no idea who this guy was. Didn't know that he was raised in the palace of Pharaoh's house or any of that stuff. This is a pretty tall assignment to give to anybody. Even if they were somebody who was a military power, a political leader, anything like that, to say, go in and talk to this leader of this nation, pagans, whatever they are, go talk to them and tell them, hey, all those people you have as slaves, I'm here to take them out of here. That's not going to go over very well. It's a pretty tall order. I don't think any one of us in this room would think, I can't do that. I'm not qualified to do that. Has God ever asked anybody in this room to do, have you ever felt led to do something by God? Anybody in here? Probably at some time in your life, probably all of us have. I know if you're a Christian, the very first thing you were called to do was follow him. Put your faith in him, right? We're all called to do that. That's the first thing we're called to do. You felt that calling, did you not? I mean, you knew God wants me to come and give my life to him, period. You know that. Throughout your Christian walk, you'll feel that calling, that pulling to do certain things at various points of your life. That's the way God operates. He will call upon us to do things. Now, a lot of times, I can remember I hadn't been a Christian a whole long time, I didn't think. Of course, it's been a few years now, before I was asked to start teaching Sunday school. I'm like, I can't do that. I don't know anything. And I hate public speaking, believe it or not. I was one of those kids in high school, and I can't remember back that far, that if the teacher called the roll and I said here, my face would turn red and my palms were sweaty. That's how bad I hated to speak in front of other people. It was horrible. I've mostly gotten over that. So you know, it's just one of those things. It's like, I don't think I can do that. And, you know, I think I've probably been teaching here for almost 20 years. I got saved back in 96 or so. So it's been a few years.
Mark, in December I will have been here 20 years.
In this church?
Yes, sir. So it's been longer than 20 for you. So.
Okay, all right. It's been a couple of years. But it's one of those things like, I can't do this. I'm not qualified to do this. You know what? It turns out that if you just trust in God, guess what? You can do it. You can do whatever you're called to do. If you just say, you know what? I can't do this on me. But if I just kind of give up control a little bit, guess who will take over? God. And there you go. So Moses, after God has been, and that first little sentence there I gave about what Moses was called to do, that came out of the previous chapter. It's a pretty tall assignment he's got. So Moses did the first thing that I think all of us would do at this point. Start backpedaling, right? Not me, God. I'm not the guy for this, right? He starts out in verse 1 there, Lord, look, no one's going to believe any of this. If I go and try to tell people this message that you're giving me right now, no one's going to believe this. They're not going to listen to me, and they're never going to believe that you appeared in front of me. That's what Moses said in verse 1 here, talking to God, after God's given him this assignment. So God had already laid out the plan. Is anybody familiar with any plan that God's ever made that failed? No. All right. Moses is about to learn that all of that's, God is in control. God does have a plan. But Moses responded back with doubts and excuses, just like we do, just like I did. Nope, I can't teach Sunday school. That's beyond my capability. And I'm sure that probably some folks in here could look back and say, no, I don't think that's my calling. I don't think that's what I was supposed to do at all. And yet, here we all are, right? All right, so I'm going to take the next 3 verses together, and I'm going to read them. I don't think we're going to get very far in this lesson today, but let's read these next 3 verses together. It says, and the Lord said unto him, what is that in thine hand? And he said, a rod. And he said, cast it on the ground. And he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses fled from before it. And the Lord said unto Moses, put forth thine hand, and take it by the tail. And he put forth his hand, and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand. So God wasn't sending Moses on some half-baked mission, was he? I mean, this is a serious plan. This is monumental. We're talking about millions of people being involved in this whole ordeal here. And Moses is the guy who has been assigned to take care of this. You know, we can always rest assured, and I already said this, if God has called us to do something, he has already worked out all the details. We try to do all the details. Okay, well, God, I'll do that, but I'm going to do it my way, okay? I got this. That doesn't work out very well either. we have to trust. We have to learn to trust in God. If He's led us to do something, called us to do something, it's okay to just say, okay, God, show me the way. Instead of, okay, God, I got it. I don't need you. You don't need to say anymore. I got this. Because we try to rely back on our own plan. So God saw that Moses was carrying a rod, which is a staff that he used in his shepherding career now that he's in. And he told Moses to throw it on the ground, and it immediately turned into a snake, right? And it says a serpent, a snake, big snake. Any of you like snakes? Moses did probably what the majority of us would do. Woo, I'm away from that. You know, he fled from it. He does not want to be around this snake. And God tells Moses, you see Moses starting to come around to just listen to God's plan, right? So he tells Moses to take the snake by the tail. He probably needed to tell me to do that several times, maybe at gunpoint, I'm not sure. And the snake, as soon as Moses put his hand on the tail of the snake, it immediately turned back into the staff, the rod, right? It's great. So what was the purpose of that? It's going to show some power, right? All right, so in verse 5, God tells Moses, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm showing you this. That they may believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath appeared unto thee. So this was not just for Pharaoh's benefit of seeing this, but for all these people that are supposed to follow Moses out of bondage, out of Egypt. Because, I mean, can you imagine this? You're in this life, you're under the Egyptian rule by Pharaoh, you're forced to slave day in and day out and all this stuff, and here comes this guy Moses, who you may or may not have ever heard of, and say, okay guys, I'm here to take y'all out, let's line up and go. Yeah, right. I mean, you know, you're not just gonna automatically trust that. So, but God wanted to prove to the people that God, the God of their fathers, and he named all this, had truly appeared before Moses, that they would have some proof in the shape of a miracle that, hey, there's some power involved here. So maybe he did come from God. You know, we're a seeing is believing kind of people, aren't we? God knows our nature. He knows what it takes to convince us to do things and to help build that trust. So God was, all right, let's give you this. I'm going to show you this. And that's going to help the people be convinced that this message is coming from God, right? Any questions, comments before we keep going? All right, verses 6 and 7, he says, and the Lord said, furthermore unto him, put now thine hand into thy bosom. And he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous as snow. And he said, put thine hand into thy bosom again. And he put his hand into his bosom again, and plucked it out of his bosom. And behold, it was turned again as his other flesh. So now God tells Moses, put your hand inside your garment, you know, over your chest there, inside your clothing. And he said, and when Moses pulls it back out, it's leprosy. He's covered with leprosy on that hand. Leprosy was a pretty big thing back in those days. Number one, if you had leprosy, you were unclean. It was incurable. It was very contagious. They were, she's right up here, Scotty. She's okay. I'm watching. She's coming down the side. So it was one of those things where if you had leprosy on or about your body, you're outcast. Nobody's getting close to you. Nobody's going to touch you because you are unclean. You have a disease that can't be cured. I don't want it. Don't get near me. So it's a pretty big thing. So Moses takes his hand. It's white, dead flesh, puts it back into his garment again, pulls it out, and it's healed back to normal. Anybody else could heal leprosy? No. The doctors that they had, there was no cure for leprosy. So this was a pretty big sign, especially in those days. You know, for us to read that now, it seems like, oh, okay, big deal. But it was a big deal. It was a very serious thing to cure leprosy or to see it gone from somebody. That's just not going to happen. All right, and it says in verse 8, he said, and it shall come to, and this is still God talking, and it shall come to pass, if they will not believe thee, neither hearken to the voice of the first sign, that they will believe the they will believe the voice of the latter sign. So God explains to Moses, look, if they don't believe the first miracle, the changing the staff into a snake and then back to a staff, and listen to you, then they will listen to the second one. Once you show your hand is leprous and then you show it's not, then they're going to believe you. But you ever notice when God's plans, it's like there's backups to backups to backups that we could never think about. You know, here's what happens when we plan. When we plan our lives, we plan, I got this, I don't need any help, I don't need God to direct me. I got it until we hit that first snag, right? And you hit that snag, what's your plan B? We usually don't have one, do we? We're like, no, my plan was right. I had this all figured out. I knew how to do this all by myself. I can fix these financial problems. I can fix these relationship issues. I can fix it, whatever it is, whatever the big things are that's going on in our lives. I got it. But we don't, because the first time the train jumps the tracks, we're derailed. That's it. With God, though, if you look at this, talk about the master planner. You know what? You get to this, they're going to believe you if you do this, but if not, you're going to do this. But you know what? If they still don't believe you, I got this. I got this. There's always more to the plan we could never fathom, because God's mind works in ways that we can't comprehend. He knows all the obstacles. He sees all the roadblocks. He sees all the things that might happen. And there's a plan for it. And it just continues and continues that way. All right. But and it shall come to pass in verse 9, if they will not believe also these two signs, either hearken to thy voice, that thou shalt take of the water of the river, pour it upon the dry land, and the water which thou takest out of the river shall become blood upon the dry land. Not a very pretty thing to think about, but God tells Moses, look, if they didn't believe the first two things, get some water out of the river, pour it on the dry ground, it's going to turn to blood. That'll convince them. Right? Was Moses convinced? Not quite. And Moses, in verse 10, if you look at verse 10, it says, Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore, nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech and of a slow tongue. So Moses doubts, even though he's seen these things and God's told him what he's going to do, step by step by step by step, Moses is not convinced. He still has doubts. He's just not sure. But God, I'm not a good speaker. I'm slow of speech, slow of tongue. I am not the guy to be a spokesman, right? God thought otherwise, didn't he? And that was his plan. So you can look at these next two verses and you can tell, in my mind, it looks like God's hit that point with Moses where, okay, I'm tired of your excuses. This is the plan. Okay? It's almost like that when you're arguing with your child why they need to do this or do that. Okay, finally. It's because I said so, all right? So let's look at verses 11 and 12. And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb, or the deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. God's heard enough of Moses' excuses. He's heard enough of the doubts. You know why he says, you can't talk? Who do you think made man's mouth? Well, that's a lame excuse. Now think about that for just a minute. Who made the dumb or the deaf? Who made the seeing or the blind? Wasn't it me? The Lord? The guy you're talking to? Wasn't I the one that did all these things? Kind of puts Moses' doubts and excuses into perspective too, doesn't it? Look, you're worried about what you're going to say. Didn't I create your mouth? Didn't I create all of you? Didn't I create everything here? You think I can't do this? He finally just tells him, look, it's time to go. Just go. I'll be your mouth and I'll teach you what to say. And that's where our text ends for today. God had a plan. He had selected Moses to do it, and there weren't going to be any excuses coming from Moses why he couldn't do it. Now, could Moses have continued to offer up excuses? Could Moses have done this? Could he have done that? Sure. God's plan would have still been accomplished. Whether it was through Moses, whether it was through John Smith down the road, doesn't make any difference. If God has a plan, it will be accomplished. God selected Moses. He was tired of Moses' excuses and he told him to go on. All right, so we'll kind of wrap up here a little bit. You know, many times in our lives, God leads us to do things. The first, obviously, we've already mentioned, is to follow him. Every one of us in this room has heard that calling, felt that calling, hopefully responded to that calling. But like Moses, after that, God will continue to call you to do things, lead you to do things, take you to opportunities where you can do things. And like Moses, we come up with all kinds of excuses. Why I can't, I'm not qualified, I don't have the time, I'm not the guy for this, and all that stuff. It's where we all have to be very, very careful. God has a plan for our lives. I believe that if we buck the plan too much and don't trust in the Lord and follow that plan, we're setting ourselves up for those obstacles that we talked about. Sometimes I believe God will just look back and say, you know what? I've called you to do this. I'm kind of asking you to just follow that lead, that calling to do this. If you choose not to do it or to do it a different way, then I'm just going to let you slam head first into the first wall that you come to, whatever that may be. You know, y'all probably heard me say this in here before, but I've heard an old phrase. It says, left to my own devices, I will self-destruct. And that's what happens. When we decide that we are the master planners of our lives, don't need to do what God said. I'm going to go to church on Sundays, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But, you know, the rest of it, all this loving people and helping people and whatever it is God's called you to do, I don't really need to do all that. I got my own plan worked out. And pretty soon our lives are out of control. And when they get out of control, we need to sit back sometimes and think, who created this life? God did, the master planner. He created everything about us. He created what's going on. He controls everything that is going on. The same God that led his people from bondage all those years ago can certainly lead our lives. You think about that undertaking. An entire nation of people being released from bondage. They outnumbered the Egyptians. You think about that? It's time to let them go. Time for them to be free. If God can accomplish that, basically with one man, now he had some help, but one man called to do this, if he could do that, don't you think he could take care of all those roadblocks that comes up in our lives? All those little things that we think are so devastating and my life is over and woe is me and all that good stuff. We just have to trust him and we have to trust in that plan. All right, I'm done, everybody. I appreciate your time and attention.